Good morning. Can you hear me? Welcome to the workshop by Todd and Tamara Rasmussen, Don't Drop the Rope, 2 Key Strategies for Churches to Keep Missionaries from Drifting Away. Todd and Tamara serve at Bethlehem Baptist Church. Todd is the pastor for Global Outreach, and I have the privilege of serving with him at Bethlehem. And his wife, do you have an official title?
Coordinator for Member Care.
Coordinator for Member Care, we'll take it. And Todd and Tamara served for many years in Africa with Mission Moving Mountains, and also with Daystar University in Nairobi. And they have a lot of experience, a lot of stories, lots of wisdom, lots of ideas. So hopefully this will be helpful to you. Let's begin in prayer. Lord, we pray for your blessing upon this time together. I pray that the things that Todd and Tamara have to say will be useful and helpful and come from a place of wisdom, not theirs but yours. We ask your blessing upon this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Okay. Thanks for coming. I know there's a long list for snacks, a long line for snacks, so people will be coming, I'm sure, as we get started. But wanted to begin with a picture of Tamara and I and our 2 boys, Jacob and Daniel, many years ago. And this is in Tanzania, East Africa. And I like this picture because it has a big tree behind it, a big, strong foundation. And that's because that's the church. The church stood behind us well for our 8 years that we were in Tanzania. And they are an important part of the team. And that's what we want to talk about this morning, is the church has a vital role to play on the team of sending and caring and equipping global partners. And that's a big part of our story as well. So, the idea of holding the rope. And I think part of that is the idea of understanding that what does it mean for a church to hold the rope for global partners so that they don't drift away. This verse from 3 John is, I think, a key one. It says, "Beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. For they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth." You can just hear in there that combination that we are fellow workers, we're together in this, and sending in a way that honors God, that is in a manner that is worthy of Him. And that's a key part that we have in churches. And I just want you to think, as you listen to this presentation, think of your church in mind, of where are you in your ability, in your capabilities of being a partner, of being a team member that is supportive of your global partners. And, it's interesting when I ask sometimes our missionaries, what's your church? And there are a couple options for a lot of our folks, because some of them join a church on the field, or they serve in a mission agency in some other state outside of Minnesota. And so they have a different home church, but Bethlehem still is their home sending church. But what I want to talk to you about is really your home church. If you're part of a church, how do you help support global partners well? And so I just want you to think for a moment, what is your home church? And I'd like you to speak it out loud so that you are focusing on that as you hear Tamara and I speak. So count of 3, speak it out loud. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Blessings on your churches that you will send in a manner worthy of God.
And we were just wondering who is attending here today. How many are on a missions, like a formal missions committee? Okay. How many people have been on the field serving for more than 2 years? Okay. And then we assume the rest of you care about missionaries and are here in one capacity or another. I've been thinking a lot about Philippians and how Paul ministered with them. And it's a good example of the church coming alongside someone. It's not his home sending church. It's actually the church he planted. And yet you can see I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ Jesus. It is right for me to feel this way about you all because I hold you in my heart. For you are all partakers with me of grace, both in my imprisonment and the defense and confirmation of the gospel. And for God is my witness, how I yearn for you with the affection of Christ. So can you just hear the love between them, that they've been working together? They're partakers of grace. He yearns for them with affection. He says earlier he thanks them for their partnership. They have a sweet relationship, and he's keeping that going. And he says later that they were one of the only churches that sent him money. And they sent that money through Epaphroditus. And then Epaphroditus stayed and ministered with him and loved on him. So it was sort of like sending a short-term worker to come alongside him and bless him. And so we can just see Paul was blessed by the early church and them coming alongside him. And we just want to keep learning how our churches can bless those global partners.
So in talking today, in our time together, we wanted to cover 2 key strategies. And as Tamara and I were preparing, really a third one emerged. So you get a bonus today. There are 3 strategies that we want to talk to you about. And we want you to think about your church in particular. And these 3 are CPS, the culture of care at your church, the preparation that you do as a church for your global partners to go out, and third, a sustaining care that you will give as they are out there and when they come back. So sustaining them through to the next place that God has for them. So that's CPS. And so be thinking about ways, okay, what kind of report card would I give my church? And where do we need to grow in these 3? And what are we doing well? And so even as we talk about some of the ideas that we've seen over the years, we want this to be useful for your church regardless of the size. So the first one is the culture of missionary care at our churches. Are we developing a whole DNA that's part of our church so that when we talk about caring for global partners, it's just an overflow of who we are? And so there's a culture not only of care but missions, and it comes together in missionary care. So what's critical is, do you see in your church just a beautiful connection to God's heart for the nations? That you see it from the preschool where there are maps of the world in preschool rooms. I love that when I sit with the kindergartners and I see the map and then pictures of the kindergarten age children of our families around the world. So here they are in their early years getting a sense of missions and care at that early age. And then you go through the church and you see it's reflected in the preaching pastor and what he loves. When he talks about missionary stories or engaging the unengaged or the unreached, he weeps. Is there a heart of care and passion for the nations? And then content that overflows, that God cares about blessing the peoples of the earth. From Genesis 12 all the way to Revelations, that we see that God has a heart for the nations.
And if you don't feel like your pastor has that vision yet, pray for him and speak into it. Bethlehem has had a lot of things going on in missions, but when John Piper came to the church in 1980, he really wasn't thinking about missions. It really wasn't on his heart. And the Lord kind of got a hold of him. And some of that was through a couple people at our church who really cared about missions and came and talked to him about, these are people groups that don't know him. And he and Tom Steller in 1983 all of a sudden had this awakening and began to just be driven by that. And so pray for your pastors, speak into it, help them to get a vision, because what comes from the pulpit often helps to reflect the whole culture of the church.
So how many in here have had a chance to take the Perspectives on the World Christian Movement class, Perspectives class? Okay, it looks like about half. And this is a great tool to just get a passion for people groups. And what are these unreached peoples? And what's God's heart for the nations and for the peoples? And why is he pursuing peoples to know him? And just seeing that be woven in the understanding of the story of the Bible. that the story of the Bible is about a great God who has a love letter inviting the peoples of the world to love his son Jesus, and his son will be glorified, and there will be people from every tribe and tongue and language. That as you tell the story of the Bible, it's just woven together with a beautiful sense of God's heart for the nations. So that's a big piece of the missions part of your church.
So we have the verse, let the peoples praise you, O God, let all the peoples praise you. That is our goal, and that's what we want our church to be about. And we want that to be part of our DNA that's sprinkled throughout. And then also that second one Todd was talking about, a care for people. And hopefully the church has a way of discipling and mentoring and bringing young people up through a faith and knowing Jesus. And some of that can come through all of the Sunday schools and junior high and high school, and what do you do with college students, and what kind of counseling do people get, and what happens when there's harder problems, what happens when there's abuse and struggles. Does your church have ways to come alongside people? And then as they do that, those things help to get people who are going out to be steadier. We've talked to some people that have done a lot of missionary care, and they said that a lot of the generation that's coming out to go to the field right now is very broken, and they see that more than they have in the past. And so we as a church, if we can help people prepare in the years before they're sent, just to work through the hard things in their lives. There's just so many difficult things in people's lives. How do we come alongside them even before they head out?
So the DNA of your church relates to care for, in general, for the people of your church. And just the whole idea of, how's your church doing in knowing how to minister to another person who is going through hard things? So here's another evaluation question. And if you say, well, I think we're doing okay, it's really a question of deep discipleship. When we talk about discipling others, do you see in your church a heart of care to come alongside someone going through brokenness and hardship? And when I've interacted with mission agencies and say, how can the church be a better care provider and help equip people well before they come to the agency? What can be done? How can we be a caring church for them? And time again, it's help them deal with their brokenness. And there are two things there in particular that I look for as a missions pastor. One is self-awareness. Are they aware, first of all, of the brokenness and the impact that it's had on them from something in their past, whether it's a broken family situation, a past addiction, some emotional challenges in their life? Are they aware of the challenges that they face? And the second one is, do they have the resources available to deal with that challenge as they go to the mission field? And so that whole understanding of, are we a caring church that asks those questions? Are you aware of what you need to face well, and do you have the resources?
And, sometimes we get a lot of people coming that are interested in missions that are just really solid and wonderful. And then we get some other people that are kind of young and immature and quirky. And when they come in to be a part of our training, we don't say, oh, I don't think so. We say, welcome. We're glad you're here. Tell me about you. Let's work on some things. And so it's not a no, and it's not really a not yet. It's let's swim for a while. And if you keep walking this path, maybe it'll be years. We don't tell them that, but we want to walk with you in preparation. So just think about how to care for people, love them where they're at, and know that God can do some amazing things to change people as they trust Him.
Tamara and I met at university, and we were a romance from the stage. We have a theater background, and it's interesting how God put that to use in our time in Africa. We did many little bits of drama as part of our teaching and storytelling. So underneath the mango tree with farmers in Tanzania, putting on a little skit or a drama, and then talking about it. And so we have just a bit of drama for you, and then we'll discuss it together. So in this drama is a pastor. We're just going to move here just a little bit to the center stage. Is a pastor and a woman from the church who's a member, and she has come to my office with a question.
Hello, Pastor Todd. I am so excited. Our pastor gave a sermon on missions, and I really want to go. And my 15-year-old daughter has been really just talking about every day that she wants to go to the mission field with me. Help us. Can we go?
Okay, is there, have you been communicated to that there's a need on the field, that there's someone who's on the long term that can help supervise that? Have you considered the cost of that and evaluating if that's an appropriate thing? And are you looking at the mess you might leave, or is this strategic, or are you providing a kind of a helping hand view? So there's the end of our skit. So part of it is when we are looking at a way to evaluate when someone has an idea of how do they get started in missions, and what can we do that will allow them to look at some of the opportunities. And when you hear the number of questions there, what is the quality of that? Do you hear the complexity of going out? So people who have an idea. So how do we walk alongside and care for people? And sometimes Tamara and I put a pause on those kinds of questions. And we move into how do we care for the people behind the missions questions? And so really the idea of understanding there's a complexity of issues, but how do we move into a caring mode of questions? And so we're back to the stage. We want to do a drama here on someone who has come back from the field. And so here, Tamara is a missionary returning, and from the field, and I'm going to speak with her about her experience.
Hi, Pastor Todd. It's so good to see you. I'm so tired.
All right, I've just a few questions for you. I want to check in on your marriage, your children, your finances, how they're doing. How's your team doing in cross-cultural language learning, as well as the culture in general? Okay, there's it. So that's the skit. So once again, we have lots of questions. The church has lots of questions. We evaluate many things, complexity of missions, but noticed how the number of questions still is many in this little piece of drama. And do you hear that the pastor cares, right? Do you hear that? These are caring questions to ask about all these kinds of things. But what's the problem? What do you hear in this problem? What do you see in this little drama that would be a problem? Okay. Compassion is like he seems to care, a lot of questions, but where's the compassion? What else do you see? Listen. Okay, and listening. What we found is a culture of care for your church goes beyond the complexities of thinking of missions, but moves into people's lives to say, will we really listen where they're at and walk with them in that time? And Tamara and I call this the Sweet 16 dance, that we have 16 questions that we ask our global partners or people who are looking to go to the field, but we don't rifle through them and say, okay, sit down, I have a list of 16 questions. And so if I'm preparing someone that's going to do a trip overseas to visit a global partner family, or they're coming to the office, they don't stop and say, okay, give me the questions and I'll make sure I can fill out the form. It's not a form, it's a relationship of listening. And I like to call it the Sweet 16 dance because there are two questions that really lead to the dance, and you may not even have to ask the other 14 if you are really listening. If you set up the situation well, the first question, if you are sitting with someone and you've just had a nice meal together and you're in a quiet environment and you're face-to-face with them and you ask the question, how are you doing? And pause and listen. And this is one of those practical takeaways that we just prayed about together, is if you take away just this piece, that have some questions in mind, but start with the Sweet 16 dance and let them talk. And then you say, well, what else? How did that impact your children? And so I'm in my mind, I'm trying to get to these other questions, but I'm going to make connections as I listen. And the second question then, tell me about what's hard. And sometimes it's a follow-up question of, tell me more about that. Or, gosh, that is hard. And so just let them go. And here's a bonus for husbands in the room. This is a great date perspective, is that when Tamara and I go out and we've had a busy week and we sit down after a nice meal, and I said, how are you doing? And listen. You know, what's been hard this week? And listen. You can give a real blessing of care to people.
And I just want to add the personal testimony. I mean, it sounds really simple, but I think it's really powerful. And when we were on the field, we were there for about 8 years, a lot of challenges. And when people would come, especially a woman would come to visit us, and you have a lot of busyness and you're cooking, you're doing things. But when at some point she would say, Tamara, how are you doing? And there was just enough time to know that she'd actually listen to me. That just released all sorts of mess in me and gave me an opportunity to take a deep breath and feel loved and kind of work through some of the things that were going on. And so with anywhere where your missionaries are back, people that you love, to take that time to let them share, it's just a huge blessing. And I think if you talk to a lot of people coming back, I think there's a lot of missionaries that are sort of afraid to share what's really going on because they're, for a lot of different reasons. But I think the demeanor you have and the openness you have to give them some space can really bless them.
So those two little bits of drama, you saw the first one that really was digging into the strategic questions. But the second drama moved to remind us that we are talking to people who have things going on in their life, and we want to walk with them as they walk with Jesus. And if we are that kind of team member, those kind of churches, yes, we want to do the strategic thinking. But if they know, first of all, that we care, then that opens the door for some beautiful content discussions. And that, too, is a caring discussion. But first, are we really listening and caring for our people where they're at? And sometimes it means we need to set up other time and we need to do other things. But are we asking and dancing well in the Sweet 16?
And, as you said, this is simple. Everybody knows this. But as we talk about holding the rope and keeping people from drifting away, we've seen people come back from the field really beat up. And we've thought, I don't know that they're going to make it. I don't know that they're going to get back out. They look like they're pretty done. And yet to have the church come and start coming alongside them and having people love on them and having them get help through counseling, it's amazing how some of these people say, the church has been so good and they've stood behind me and God's really done a good work. And we have several families that are back on the field that I didn't think would be. And so there are ways to hold a rope that keep people on the field and also get them back to the field after some really hard things.
So a DNA of care, of are we the kind of church that is really seeking to come alongside people in their hard things? As we have in mind the content of missions, do you see that in your church? How are you doing in blending the content of teaching the great love story of God's heart for the nations through his Son? And are we helping people with their brokenness and listening to them, coming alongside them? And so that's the DNA of missionary care. And sometimes that is a critical piece that's missing. In fact, as Tamara and I were preparing, like I said, this was the bonus strategy. We realized if we don't have churches that are in a healthy place with their DNA, then it's going to be hard to tack on these other two strategies. So this is a big one. And people in the church can impact this. You think, well, I'm not a leader in the church. I'm not on staff. What can I do? Well, that's part of the story of Bethlehem, is there was a persistent member of our church who said, look at God's heart for the nations. Well, let's pray. What can we do? Let's not forget this. And just kept reminding the staff and praying and inviting the perspectives class to come to the church. Many things happened and overflowed. And then Pastor Piper was writing and passionately speaking. And suddenly here we are off on an incredible journey of missions that is still going on at our church. In fact, this last fall, 68 new people came forward at our missions event to say, here we are, send us, Lord. And so we are now preparing a group of over 100 in our nurture program. It's our 2-year training program for sending out missionaries from our church. And that's the next point, is how do you prepare well when you have people responding to this culture, out of this culture? How do you prepare them and nurture them with care?
So in 1983, after our leadership took the Perspectives course, they put together what they call the Nurture program. And it's been going, we went through it before we went out. We were mentored by people. We had classes. We have a lot of information on that if you want all the specifics of what courses and what books. If you're a small church, there's a lot of the same things you can do. A lot of courses are online, a lot of books someone can read through and talk to someone about them. And so that's kind of the head part of it. At the beginning, we have a whole program of things to learn that might help to prepare people for the field.
So oftentimes I'll talk about the 4-H's. And I grew up in a small town in Iowa where 4-H was one of those opportunities. And we have a lot to learn from farm kids, because the 4-H's of head, heart, hands, and health are really helpful for understanding, are we preparing our people well? Are we caring for them and sending them out in a way? So the content, the head that Tamara mentioned, the heart, what is their attitudes and motives for wanting to go out? In the skit where we talked about the woman with her 15-year-old daughter, sometimes we have people who come to say, this would be good for my daughter. This would be good for me to go out to the mission field. And so understanding that we're going to have a mixture of motives when we talk to people. And are we sitting down with them and nurturing them where their hearts are? And realize that none of our hearts are perfect. We don't send out people with perfect hearts. We send out people with hearts that are being worked on by Jesus.
Another one of them is the hands. We want people to have some practical experience. Why would someone do a lot of evangelism overseas if they don't do any evangelism here in the United States? Evangelism is a little tricky for some people, so how do we have them go with someone and show them how to do it and help them to practice that? Are they discipling? Are they leading a small group so they have opportunities for leadership? The church can do so much before a person actually applies for a mission agency to get a person ready to go. And I think to be thinking about that as part of your mission strategy, that it starts 2, 3, 5 years before they go.
And then the last H, health. And as we mentioned before, the idea of brokenness and health is a critical piece. And it's physical health, it's emotional health, it's spiritual health, it's relational health. So health is a big term here. And when Tamara and I were serving in Tanzania, we talked in Swahili about uzima, which is wholeness. And it encompasses all of those pieces. And I remember introducing the gospel in one village, and I came early one morning. This was right after harvest, and here were a lot of farmers that had celebrated. They had just, got some money from the first harvest, and you see that they'd been talking about they didn't have fees for their kids for school. Some of their kids didn't even have plastic flip-flops and had bellies where you could tell they had worms because they were running around in the cattle pen without shoes on. And so finances were really tough. And here it was after the first harvest. The next morning, there are drunk men laying all over the ground at the village I went to. And when I visited a home, and the man said to me, "We do not have uzima, what you've been telling us about from the Bible, that we are not whole. We, even though we had money, our hearts were not ready to do what was right with that funds. And so that there's not a wholeness here spiritually, as well as that we see physical issues. But the same is true for our people coming to us in our church and say, where are the places where health is a bit off? And how can we come alongside in that process?" So health is a big term. And what we found is that sometimes in the church, we can speak directly into that. But there are other times when we need assistance from organizations like Redemption Twin Cities or Minnesota Renewal Center. We've had a long-term relationship with Patrick Rupp and his group here, because sometimes there are topics and issues that are big and a little too big and time-consuming for the staff that we have at the church. So how can we come alongside, not to say that we're still going to be connected. Keeping that connection is important for the church. but to get some additional care from another member of the team, that could be very useful.
And we're talking a lot about preparing before people go, but a lot of these things carry over to when people are on the field. Todd and I do travel quite a bit to visit our global partners. If your church has an opportunity to do that, to send people to encourage people who are on the field, a lot of these same things apply of letting them talk, listen to them, work through things. And we have done some of the conflict reconciliation kinds of mediation things. Those, as we're talking about teams, a church can have people come and help with those things, and that can be a big blessing.
One of the things we found that is a real blessing in our church is Barnabas teams or advocacy groups or support groups or go teams. I've heard those phrases at different places in this organization. And a Barnabas team is basically a group, we would define it as, like 5 to 10 people in a church who meet monthly to pray for the global partner, to help hold the rope in prayer. So that's number one. Communication. So a lot of times they'll get a Skype and they'll actually have an interview with the global partner overseas while they're meeting, or they'll get an email in advance of what are the issues that the team could pray about and how are the kids doing, and just a lot of specifics. And some of the problems of things like, we have a newborn that's not sleeping well and we're not sure what to do with colic. I can't receive all of those kinds of things. We have a lot of global partners, so I can't respond to all that level of specificity, but we have Barnabas teams and people who care and say, okay, let's find some resources there and make sure you have help. And so that communication, number 2. And the third one is the idea of practical helps, of ways that they can practically come alongside our global partners. Perhaps the kids are coming back from Indonesia and have no winter clothes their size. And so the Barnabas team rallies and figures out, okay, how can we get these things? And providing childcare while the global partner is support raising. And so they do some babysitting and all kinds of practical ways they can come alongside the group. And there are a lot of good ideas on how to do that well. And out of curiosity, how many in your churches, have support teams or Barnabas teams, go teams? Just raise your hand. I want to see if you're... Okay, about a fourth. So for us, this is one of those key things about having a successful caregiving church member. Barnabas teams have been a critical piece. And but it's not always easy. So time for another little skit. All right? Here's Todd at his computer. And I'm on a Barnabas team. And I just got an email from the global partner that I've been supporting. And I'm on the Barnabas team. I have a heart for missions, but I've never been overseas myself. But I really care about this person who is emailing me, okay? Dear Todd, thank you so much for your prayers for me and my family. We are here in Malaysia, and it's hot as usual. But man, has it been a tough week. Our team is arguing, and I'm not sure what to do about it. And also, we have one of our kids who is not getting along at school, doesn't have the language ability. The other kids are throwing rocks at our child. And my wife, who has struggled with depression in the United States, as you know, is really having a dark week. And by the way, did I tell you that my parents are also back home, are struggling with whether they should move into the retirement home. Thanks for your prayers. Love, John. Wow. Okay, I'm going to write a reply. Okay, here we go. Dear Ted, man, that is so hard. In fact, things are so hard there, it sounds like, I think you should come home. Love, Todd. Okay. Did you hear the caring heart? That I was listening, these are hard things. I agreed with that. And yet I moved to a place where, man, it just seemed overwhelming. And it says something about Barnabas teams are great, and we want that, but we in the church need to come alongside those teams and to help train them and prepare them, help them understand. And what kind of topic do you think would be helpful? Let me get a few ideas here from the group here. What kind of topic do you think would be helpful for that for that Barnabas team member to have some training on? What do you think?
Theology of suffering.
Theology of suffering, good. What other topic might be useful here? Okay, just conflict resolution, how to advise on the team is stuck. You're getting some ideas here and some materials here that could be helpful. All right, what else? What's that? Okay, listening, how to listen well, how to reflect back and say, that is really hard. I hear that you're really struggling, and of these things, what's the hardest one here, or how are you doing, or just going deeper and not just jumping to a conclusion. Okay, so listening. What else? Okay, how to have some kind of use for outside resources. Barnabas teams don't have to solve problems all on their own. There are resources out there. They can connect with lots of resources. Those are just a few ideas. But it's that kind of training. There is discipleship to be done with people on Barnabas teams. And you can hear how you can come alongside them and build a missions vision and also deal with topics of care that will also be woven into the DNA of your church. So during this preparation phase, Barnabas team work can be really helpful. Yeah, question.
How can you share with us, how do you start to build such kind of Barnabas team?
Yeah.
Doesn't have that kind of teams.
Yeah.
And the resource may be one of it. Can you share with us how
Yeah.
Bethlehem Baptist started?
Yeah, the question is, how can you start building a Barnabas team? How did Bethlehem, begin building this? And it's a grassroots building process. So when someone feels called by God to go out to the nations, we say, okay, we want you to talk to 5 to 10 people in our church here and ask them to serve as a Barnabas team. And then we'll train them. We'll send someone to meet with one of the first meetings and talk about the big 3, prayer, communication, practical helps, and what other Barnabas teams have done and how it's worked well. And then we'll walk with that Barnabas team as you leave the United States and go to your place of service. So that's how it just builds. And then another global partner. And then you ask them, find 5 to 10 friends, and you start the process over. So that's the way we would build it. If you are unable to send out people from your church, if your church is really small at this point and you don't have people to send, maybe it's one of the people you support. They come back on home assignment. They come speak at your church. And you say, would you be willing to stay a little longer and meet some people at our church? Maybe 5 to 10 people could then become your Barnabas team, and they could stay connected with you. And so when you come visit our church, there's some people here that know you well and been praying and communicating with you and providing practical helps. So it can happen that way as well. If you support some people that aren't members of your church, you can start supporting them at this level as well.
So can you hear the wonderfulness of Barnabas teams? They don't take a lot of staff time, and it puts the mission vision throughout the whole church. And you have your global partner asking a few friends to support them. These people can make a commitment for that term to say, yes, we will make a commitment to meet monthly, to communicate. And so that gives a lot of freedom to the global partner to write to them specifically because they know they volunteered. And then they come alongside them in so many practical ways, whether it's sending things or when they come home helping with housing and cars and childcare and whatever. So we do have some resources for some of this, and I'll put a piece of paper in the back. You can give me an email. I can send you some things we have that are written out with how other people have done things. When we went out, we had a Barnabas team of about 15 people, and they loved on us well, and they're still our friends, and they're really close to us. So I think churches that haven't done Barnabas teams for a long time, sometimes it's hard to get the momentum going, but persevere, because once people get the idea, it spreads in it. We have 115 families and singles that are part of our sent out from Bethlehem. And so if you think about 10 people behind each of them, that's lots of people that are invested in missions.
One of the things, as your church grows in its missions program, to put budget money toward Barnabas teams, It's not always in so much adding staff, because all of these Barnabas team members are volunteers. They're people in the church. But we budget a $500 scholarship for any Barnabas team member who will go visit their global partners on the field. And this is a great way to strengthen that relationship between global partners and their Barnabas teams. And sometimes I've called on Barnabas team leaders or close Barnabas team members to go do a care visit. And then we pick up the cost of that flight and their expenses, because they are representing the church at a caring moment that's critical. And I think a Barnabas team member actually could do the visit best of all. And so sometimes we'll put budget money toward that and to say, we're going to stand behind this concept of Barnabas teams and support it well with our budget.
I think there's another seminar later this afternoon on advocacy groups, which would be exactly this idea. You could hear how another church does it, and if you're interested, that might be helpful.
So a lot of preparation while the global partner is getting ready to go, that's caring with the 4-H's. And like I said, we have a 2-year program. And at the end of that, before people go to the field, that's when they form their Barnabas team. They've been appointed now as global partners, and now they form this group, and they meet with them a few times before they even leave for the mission field.
And so this Barnabas team is part of what we talk about in sustaining with care. We talked about a culture of care and preparing to go. And then when people are in the field, I sort of jumped into that before, that we do have these people that are kind of their day-to-day advocates, but also the pastoral care keeps in touch with some of the things that are a little harder, a little deeper. Todd mentioned some things about having counselors and people in their lives that they can meet with. We have people that Skype for counseling when they get stuck on things, and that's a huge blessing.
So the financial piece for also related to extended care. Why don't you advance those, Tamara? The financial piece of caring emotionally, relationally, spiritually, but also the financial piece and developing policies that show that caring heart. And we try to become the biggest supporter or a major donor for all the people we send out. And so we try to make a significant gift that's ongoing. But if we need to make a change in that for some reason, we do a face-to-face interaction with those global partners, see how they're doing. And generally it's up to a 6-month transition of support while they find out the next thing or make a change. And even that has some flexibility, but always done in a way that's caring. We've seen too many stories of global partners who get an email from their church saying, we need to cut you off as support. And sorry about that. And it's like, we can do a better job in caring for our people. And that financial piece is another way we can do that. And so that's a part of it.
Todd talked a little bit about church-wide involvement and how it can spread through all the different parts of the church. And I think when we've talked about the church coming alongside global partners, we've found that there's some specific places that it's been helpful. Some of that has been like when there's an issue with an agency and the agency is part of the problem. It's been really nice for the church to be able to enter in and be their advocate. I think we've seen this a couple times with child safety issues. That seems to be something that's happening more where incidents can happen where someone is accused of something, and until it's decided whether that's true or not, the agency moves often into a more legal mode, so they're not going to be sued and shut down. But they often can't be the one to come alongside this hurting family. And so the church needs to step up and be there, whether they're guilty or not. I mean, if something has happened, they need someone to love them and help them as they repent. If they haven't, they need to believe in them. So we find that there's places where you just really want to be their advocate and love them wherever they're at and whatever's going on.
Tamara and I have been in this role now for about 6 years. And the first month we came on was a global partner family saying, you know what, we've had a difference of opinion on our team, and the team leader has asked that we leave the team. But we want to stay in this country, but there are no other teams from our agency at this country. And we're not sure what to do, but our agency is not being supportive. Okay, so now you have a team falling apart, and you have an agency issue, and the agency's not coming alongside well because they're not in it. They're saying we're going to support the team leader, and sorry. And so we went down to the agency, and we had a meeting with the leadership there and said, okay, how can we support our people well? Help us to understand this. And the next meeting was when the family came back, we helped with reconciliation with the agency and to see if things could end well in this chapter. And there's effort that the church needs to do because really the church is the main owner of sending and member care. And so that's why we like this text from Acts 13 as such a critical one, is to realize that we love our partnership with agencies, but sometimes we have to intervene in a way of giving care because it's our relationship in sending. And from this text in Acts 13, now there were in the church at Antioch prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simon, who was called Niger, Lucas of Cyrene, Manaen, a lifelong friend of Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul, while they were worshiping the Lord and fasting. So they were a church. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." Then, after fasting and prayer, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. So the church really, this is about sending. I recently visited with an agency leader, and they're a large agency. And you say, you know the number of people that we sent out that we have sent out right now? 0. Because the agency does not send. It's the church. And so if we are going to send, and send in a manner worthy of God, we need to have at its core a caring heart that reflects the heart of our Father. And so to do that, we need to have in our churches a DNA, a core of missionary care, of a passion for missions, a heart for care, and the other 2 strategies. We need to prepare well with care and then sustain them well in a caring way. So I want to stop right there and see if you have any questions. I think we have a few minutes. What time do we need to? We have about 10 minutes. Okay. Any questions? And let me know, where is your church at and which one of these areas you'd like to grow in. Maybe you'd like to probe a little bit on the DNA of your church or preparation or the sustaining ongoing care. And as Tamara mentioned, we do have some resources we'd love to share with you of things we've learned along the way and policies we've written and things that could be helpful. We're glad to share that with you. But any questions for us?
I have a comment, Todd.
Yeah.
Another thing that you can think of is if there are retired missionaries in your church, those are great people to connect with the younger people who are in their beginning stages to mentor as you go out. My mother's 90, almost 91. She was on the mission field for 17 years in the 50s and 60s, and the agency that she was with has contacted her to be a rope holder, and they pair her with new missionaries who are in their last year in their final preparation. So you could do that at your church level or a denomination, but pair your newbies or people who are on track with some of the veterans who are back in the States now who are retired.
That's a great idea, that you would find people with experience to help the younger people. I think that's really helpful. And we find that is one of the things also similar to that we have a lot of missionaries coming back and through, and the more we can have them help train our people and give them ideas of what real life is like, the more realistic. It just helps them when they get to the field. We've had people say, coming to the mission fellowships every month and meeting missionaries and hearing their stories has really helped me to understand what to expect. And the roommate who came had no idea, and she's falling apart. And I'm saying, well, this is normal because I've heard about this all these years. So even if you don't have a lot of missionaries coming through, find some and bring them in and have them share with your folks.
So our Foreign Missions Committee, or our Global Outreach Team, is made up of people who have had a lot of experience and are back from the field, and they provide care, and they interview with us, and they serve in lots of ways as well as the caregiving. So it's not just people on staff, but volunteers, as Joanne mentioned, who can really come alongside Global Partners well.
What's your mission fellowship, monthly mission fellowship like?
Yeah, monthly mission fellowship is a time where we often will have global partners share something that are back from home assignment, or we'll bring up a topic that I think we recently went through a list of, like 15 topics that we want to cover in the next 2 years. And a lot of it is how to get our people ready. And sometimes it's issues like the first term shock and surviving that. And what can you expect? Theology of suffering, we talk a little bit about that more, or we talk about team conflict. And but sometimes it's a global partner family that have just come back, and they say, what are you going through? What do you wish that you would have known more about before you went out? And so we rely on them a lot to teach topics. Other topics that come to mind, Tamara?
I mean, this whole conference is about teams, and we were on a team. We very much understand conflict of teams. I didn't have conflict much before I left. I was amazed what the Lord did with the 3 families that came from Bethlehem. We went through the grinder. And so just to kind of know how to work with peacemaking is just huge. And sometimes you can help teach that. We do some things with how to choose an agency and evangelism, discipleship. So just things that people need to know. It's look at a book of topics, what people need to do and prepare, and pick some.
And we do take full-day retreats on some of those bigger topics. Team dynamics and conflict resolution is one that we retreat on. And we've also retreated on the topic of sexual brokenness, addictions, how to deal with that if it's part of your life or someone on the team, how do you come alongside them? And so there are some of the big topics we will do a full-day retreat on as well.
Yeah, I was just wondering, with the agencies that you're working with and partnering with, do you have formal memorandums of understanding so that the agencies understand those areas that you feel you need to cover, and the agency understands those areas that they need to cover? Do you have that sort of agreement?
Yeah, the question is, do we have a formal memorandum of understanding with agencies that we would know what are they going to do and what are we going to do, what will we do together, those kinds of things. And I think my time in Africa has changed me, that I would call it the 10 cups of tea, is that sit down with them and talk with them and learn what their strengths are as an agency and what their heart is and what we can do. And so Tamara and I make visits to agency leaders or invite them to Minneapolis and talk with them. There are some basic expectations that we would check out, and some of them particularly are on continuing education and ongoing member care. Those often come together, that if an agency is going to do a visit and say, how are things going on the church planting or the school or the business, whatever, also check on member care. And if there's some big things that we should know about, let us know, and we'll do the same thing. So there's an understanding that way, and I like to have that with all of our agencies. But we don't generally do the formal thing, because what we found is that changes too often. People can't keep track of all the details of that formal arrangement. But the relationship to me is a key one. But like I said, my time in Africa has impacted me.
And it is interesting because I think as a church, we've found that we always send people through agencies. We think they offer something special that really complements what we do. And so they do a lot of the accountability and the day-to-day workings. They have people on the field that are shepherding and overseeing. And so we don't do a lot of give us a report of what you've done this year and how it's gone as far as the work part. We find that can be a lot of extra work for people on the field. So we really do a lot more with member care and checking in when we talk to them. Just in general, we find our people are very diligent and usually pushing themselves too hard rather than not working hard enough. And so the agency plays a really important part.
What do you recommend to churches that do not have a pastor for global outreach? And some churches, the staff, they may have a habit, they say, how about I dedicate something to a group of brothers and sisters, form a team, and then, yeah, go ahead. support you guys. But
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
effective or what kind of recommendation or encouragement you can give to?
Yeah, the question is, what does a church do if you don't have a formal pastor for missions that can, keep the ball moving and really address these things? And can this be delegated to volunteers, or how does that work? And I think it is you move forward with the people God has given you, and yes, it can move forward with volunteers. Maybe slower at first, but maybe as momentum goes. I've watched, even the story of Bethlehem is that our first missions pastor, that was a third of his job description. So you kind of, get a little piece of the job description in there. And then as things grow and as God does more, that grows. So it might start with volunteers, but it might be a piece of
Or
something
even the
as well.
idea that Bethlehem didn't have a missions pastor, and so then they made it a third, and then it grew. So.
Yeah.
I think our time is up. It's time for lunch. Thank you, Todd and Tamara. Hopefully this has been helpful for all of you. I just want to remind you that in the back of your folder there is a evaluation form, and while it's fresh, it would be good if you could take some time to fill that out. We're going to be collecting it at the end of the last session this afternoon. And thank you again. You have a final word?
Well, I mentioned we have some materials, and I guess I left my sign up, so I'll just put this back there. You can write your email in the back, and if you have something specific you'd like, I could send that. But we have some things of how we set up our long-term and how our global outreach teams work and Barnabas teams, and I'll just send you a folder and you can pick what you like.
Okay, enjoy your lunch. Thank you.